of what has happened in the last week, but it involves China. China has said that basically their banks can cancel any derivatives contract.
Mm-hmm.
So what you see around the world, this global financial collapse, basically it was contract fraud, really. It's these banks like Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns sold fraudulent contracts. They knew they were bogus and that they would never be met, that the obligations would never be met. So, but they pretend it's like this mystery of the market, and the market decided that the contract we sold you for 100 cents yesterday is only worth 1 penny today. And they're forcing everybody to make good on their half of the contract. Well, China has decided that that they could renege on any of these contracts, that their banks can renege on the contracts. And in fact, they're now introducing new laws that no further derivatives contracts can be engaged in between a Chinese company and foreign companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that. I saw they're recalling their gold.
Hong Kong has asked for their gold back from London. It's stored in the London Metals Exchange.
You put those two stories together, and what do you get? You get a country that's going to possibly get rid of more dollars than they are already getting rid of. If they want their bullion back, and they're shutting down all these derivative contracts and reneging on derivative trades, and they talked about, actually, they said if China reneges on these derivative contracts that are actually associated, if I'm not mistaken, I think I read on Bloomberg that they are in fact tied to gold.
Well, China specifically mentions the commodities derivatives.
Okay.
And now the other thing that happened this week, I think it was Deutsche Bank, one of these big German banks, withdrew their double long oil ETF. Some oil ETF was withdrawn. So something's going on in the oil market in particular, because all these weird things are suddenly started about commodities trading.
Right, and they speculated that on Bloomberg that if in fact China were to renege on these as the counterparty to these commodity-based derivative products, that it would put J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs out of business immediately.
Yeah.
So I guess what China has figured out is that it doesn't make any sense to threaten the U.S. government with, let's say, not buying American bonds or supporting the U.S. dollar, because the American government is controlled by Goldman Sachs. So they're not, if you want to really do something effective, you got to go to the source. You got to go to the puppet behind the puppet and the master behind it all, and that is Goldman Sachs and Lloyd Blankcheck. So they're targeting Goldman Sachs directly.
But the other thing I wonder is, is this how it works? Because China's been the center of, over the last 6 to 9 months, massive speculation in commodities, in particular, with all this the $1 trillion in new loans issued in China in the first half of the year. That almost all of it went into either the Shanghai market or commodities speculation. A lot of the oil trading, a lot of the copper, all the commodities, and they were able to, even like on the low margin commodity speculation, because of the sheer size of the country and the cheap storage, they were even able to store giant quantities of all this stuff. So they were actually storing things like oil off of China in various warehouses and stuff like that. Now so what do they pay, like 10 cents for they're paying less for the contract. Maybe it's a way to get these commodities cheap, if they're now just going to renege on those contracts, but they're not going to actually deliver any of the actual physical commodities.
Right. Yeah, well, your introduction is there's financial war going on.
Exactly.
And it's being waged in the futures pits and the commodities pits, because the derivative contracts out there have a nominal value of something like 600 or 700 trillion, and more than a quadrillion were traded last year. And the total GDP of the world is still only $50 trillion. So if you're fighting an old-fashioned war and you pick up a gun and you invade a country and you shoot some guy dead, it's a very cost-ineffective way to wage war, because for the same amount of money, you can control 10 to 20 to 30 times of derivative contracts and really put people out of business. And that's the only real way you can gain huge leverage in an economy that's run entirely by fractional reserve banking and fiat currencies. If you utilize the leverage of hedge funds, a multi-trillion-dollar industry, to do the work for you, then you can engage in economic warfare and really push that company to the wall. Just like China has figured out that the way to get what they want from America is to engage in economic warfare. Having a standing army of 1 million people is nowhere near as effective in an analog war of guys with guns going across borders, when you can use financial warfare. And they've got trillions in Forex reserve. They've got access to foreign markets. They've got all the derivative contracts. They've got all the whiz-kid algorithmic traders that they need to effect a huge financial warfare machine. And obviously now they figured this out. And again, is Goldman Sachs, do they have the firepower? Do they have the credit? Do they have the access to capital to keep gold down below $1,000 an ounce the way that they have now for several years? It's tough. I mean, in order for China to effectively attack Goldman Sachs and Goldman's hegemony over their economy and Goldman's colonialization of the Chinese economy, they have got to bust. They can't afford even to have one turncoat in the Chinese banking system. And remember, Goldman Sachs took People's Republic of China public. So you got to believe that there are some Goldman Sachs people inside the Chinese People's Public Bank, that they're in the banking system. And that's very dangerous for China. If China is serious about winning this economic war, they need to cull all the Goldman people from their banking system immediately, or you're just wasting your time, and you're wasting my time, because I've got gold and I'm waiting to go above 1,000. If China, you're going to make it go above 1,000, you've got to get rid of your Goldman Sachs people in your own backyard. There are plenty there, I'm sure, and you've got to cull them. You've got to get rid of them, or you're going to perpetually be finding yourself forced to buy U.S. Treasury bonds, just like you were forced to buy opium during the Opium Wars from the British Empire. You're going to be forced to buy U.S. Treasury bonds from the U.S. Empire. And the only way you can break out of it is to get these Goldman Sachs out of your system. There's a bad virus. America's too late. They've infiltrated our system. It's like we've got this colon parasite sitting in America's collective a-hole, and we're never going to get rid of them at this point. It's terminal. But China, you still have a chance.